A note before presenting episode 2. We had serious technical difficulties with the connection on JM's part. He was breaking up at certain points. Unfortunately, some parts the second hour of his track was lost. It didn't reach the server, and I will have to study a backup plan to have a recording going on my side of the entire thing, so that if this occurs again, I'll be able to insert those bits. Unfortunately for this time, we have no backup. We're still new in this podcasting thing, so my apologies, and also, apologies for some bits perhaps not having the continuity of the conversation as JM's bits are missing. I've tried to edit the silence and the stutterings out, and JM appears in the first hour, but after a certain point nothing reached the server. So again, apologies, and here's episode 2.
Pro.Gnosis, a podcast with J.M. and Armon Ree.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Pro.Gnosis. I am JM, joined along with my good friend Armon Ree. And today we've been joined by another comrade, for me on the other side of the pond, but closer to Armon, our friend Silas. Welcome, Silas.
Hi there. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. You guys have had a longer connection than you and I have, Silas. We've just recently spoke for the first time, but I've followed along for months now with some of your material that Armon shared, and for what it's worth to you, buddy, you guys have this unique ability to take in information and process it in a way where you seem to be able to retain it more intelligently, or speak it more intelligently. That's for sure, but in a way that you just continue to build upon what you're seeing and how you communicate it. And for people like me, who's the kind of processor that will take things in and kind of let it go once I found what I needed to from it, and become forgetful of the library that I've taken in through the years. You guys, I don't know how you do it, but again, for what it is worth to you, it seems to me like a tremendous gift. And in my opinion, it only helps when trying to communicate such complicated thoughts and through our contemplations. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's very interesting looking at, for example, just conspiratorial topics. Political conspiracies, military conspiracies. They all really are one conspiracy. But you find that it's almost you turn into an autodidact. You become multidisciplined and versed in many different aspects of fields of study. Just looking at sort of political conspiracies, economic, military conspiracies, it's very fascinating. And of course, now Armon, yourself, and even I recently have, we started looking into the metaphysics of everything, the cosmogony, and tying that all into really what is one grand tapestry, one grand story of, you could call it the conspiracy, or you could just call it merely the cycles of history.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to greet everyone as well, and In terms of what Silas is addressing, it is really there's no one single topic that can't be actually connected to another. It all binds together in a very even you could say a scary way, but it's also got the positive side to it, because it allows us to check reality, to see where we stand and who we are in that piece of space that we occupy here in this reality. So I think it all really it has to be several disciplines. We can't be specialists anymore. That's in the past. I think that's a concept that is no longer applicable. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, so with the first episode, we had some very positive feedback. It was unexpected, and we've had some good commenters on the first episode, especially on Odyssey, where the full episode was presented. I could only put a fragment on YouTube, but people were linked to the Odyssey channel. And one of these comments had several suggestions, and one of them I think would be a good starting point for our conversation with Silas today. It was made by Shoes Are OK, that is the username, and it stated as follows: unique or shared souls. Must every human material body be connected to a unique energetic soul? Could the total number of human souls be finite? Could some humans be connected to a shared soul of some kind? If there are semi or totally soulless humans, then what is their purpose in this world? Silas, I would like you to start off with answering that. What is your opinion?
I make a distinction between the soul and the spirit. So the way I would put it is the soul is that essence which is derived from the spirit, is sort of an outgrowth of it, much like the self is. It is the essence of humanity's nature, the condition of humanity, the emotional expressions that we have, even the sort of dualistic expressions within the right and left hemisphere and how they contrast. That is the soul. The spirit is something immaterial. It is like a prima causa. It's something that connects us with God, or that first principle, that pure potential. But I will say that, yes, I think this idea of soulless individuals, I do think going into this new digital system, this Internet of all things, especially if AI, people are beginning to become more and more detached, not just from their spirit and from God, but from their souls themselves, that their soul has become almost assimilated into this digital hive mind. And you're seeing that more prevalently now, especially after the event in 2020, post-dating that. It's very similar to this idea of the plastic man or the grey man, where essentially people become a tabula rasa in the hands of the psychological manipulators, and their soul can be forged, manifested by these said manipulators, and obviously placed within these biological vessels through, media, of course, going into the digital system. As it becomes more and more pronounced, you will begin to see actually sort of mental or brain implants which will interface and create this tabula rasa, this synthetic human, this synthetic soul. So yes, I do think a lot of people now are being set up to be soulless. They lack emotion, they lack depth, I would say.
Well, I could say, at least from my point of view, that, I mean, in a sort of analogy, we could say that perhaps soul would be mind without amnesia. So, in the sense of the mind is by nature amnesiac because it does not, for example, the presence of the subconscious is a sort of amnesia where the repressed material goes into, and so therefore it is not present in the conscious at all times, and it only manifests in different ways. So, but the soul retains that memory. The soul has that knowledge of the full spectrum of the mind. And then the spirit, I agree with you there, that is from the timeless, outside the realm, from the essential existence, let's say. So it is a connection to essential existence, and therefore soul would be always, like you well stated, in my opinion, connected to human existence. Now, in relation to people without souls, I am not certain that it would be without souls, but perhaps without this connection that I was talking about, and that is observable, without the connection to the timeless. So, if there are soulless people, soulless humans in the world, they would be akin to the mythological golem, right? The being that is made entirely of physicality, let's say, and then animated in a way that resembles life, but it isn't exactly life. So all of us, to a certain extent, and all our minds, to a certain extent, are artificial. They are constructs, and so we all are, in our minds, a bit of AI. But a golem, in that sense, in that mythological sense, would be entirely, its animation would be entirely AI, without any connection to an essence, to a spirit, to a timeless existence, I would say. What is your opinion, JM?
Yeah, I agree. In terms of the distinction between the soul and the essence, of course, we spoke about it last week within our thoughts of dogs, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
there are often times when you're at a certain point in looking at this where you're asking the question, how can I understand this easier? So right now I understand that I'm talking with two wordsmiths that can explain this in completely advanced ways that get us all thinking each time we hear it, and that's ultimately a huge value. But I also think we can look at this from a smaller scope in that, when Silas, you were talking about the direction of perhaps they're trying to take the human mind and the human experience, and how that correlates to the digital age, basically, right? Where the mind is the prize in this, in one side, and that's what they're going after, in a way of trying to completely eliminate all connection to essence, so to speak. And the essence in this reality, to me, is the real gold. It's the real life. It's what creates life. It's the invisible creates the visible. And without that, this realm really doesn't exist in any material way that we have come to see it and know it. It's just a void. And so when the game is played through the mind and the human experience, and it becomes further entrapped within the character mind of who it is, what it thinks of reality, and how it fits into it, it becomes more engrossed in the experience. Thus, the divide or the void between that particular soul and
Mm-hmm.
grows within, again, that human experience. And so if that is the prize, on one level, it is the human mind. It is the takeover and controlling through the programming and all the things we know about, and in that way. But again, when we see it so many times. We talk about, the term NPC gets thrown around. It's what you hear through these circles constantly. When you come to those type of folks, you can see, to me, at least through my own observations, those who are more engrossed in the mental character with what's on the screen and everything playing out around them and their involvement within it, the more I just see it as a deeper divide between their mind or the ego and their true selves. And so the actual opposite happens, obviously, when you begin to listen and pay attention more to what we speak of, in that divide obviously shrinks, it shortens, and instead of the soul, instead of the ego leaning towards or having their attention pulled more aggressively in one direction, which is into the mental images of the reality that we think are real, we now begin to move closer to that immutable, timeless, infinite source. And as Silas said, formless, immaterial. There's a shift.
Yeah.
There is a shift that happens where you are, you're thinking to yourself, my goodness, I must be one of the only few in this reality with a soul. I mean, how can I see this, or why was I gifted to be able to see this? And so you look at the rest of the reality around you that's becoming more unreal to your more real eyes now, and it's totally natural to think like, my God, this place could be 90% soulless, but I don't believe it is. I think it simply comes down to the fact that some are holding on tighter, and a very select few now are letting go and loosening their grip on the other side.
Yeah, I agree. And in terms of the what you were saying, the purpose of that collection, let's say, of the link to the true essence being replaced with an artificial link to something else, would be to exactly perhaps divert the fueling, let's say, of the creation of reality from what reality was probably purposed to be, which would be self knowledge, self discovery, onto the creation of a system that feeds um, these shadow entities, these reflections. And I think that yes, in response also to the question and the comment, um, yes, I think that there will be humans without the connection, like I said, to the essence, and the purpose of them would be to create the necessary context for this diversion, for this redirection of essential attention, essential energy away from the self discovery onto the creation of, for example, a fearful world, a fearful reality. What would you say to that, Silas?
There was a point that I want to touch upon that it sort of weaves into what both of you stated, and it centers around that idea of people state that people are narcissistic nowadays, and it's this idea of a love of oneself, an excessive love of oneself. It can even become predatorial, and it usually is predatorial. But what we see, it's like what you stated, GM. It is the true self or the soul that which is the realization of potential that is immaterial. I'm reminded of Goethe's Typus, that idea that that term that he coined, entelechy, that idea of, again, the realization of potential through the various forms that it takes within existence. But this idea of narcissism, it isn't really narcissistic, what these people exhibit. it's the creation of personalities, masks, which they believe will provide them some sort of social clout or some other, form of value within the society. So in that sense, what you're finding is people have already established artificial intelligences. They've established these personas, these masks. They're creating, excessive veils of amnesia. To steal what you stated, Armin. And really, that's what you're seeing within existence. Everything within existence seems to be predicated on descending low, descending. Everything in existence is potential descending down into lower vibrational forms eternally. And it's only a small minority who seem to want to, swim against the current. I do apologise, Armin. I think I've went on a bit of a tangent, but it was just a point I wanted to bring up regarding
no, that's perfectly
narcissism
fine.
and
This is
such.
free. This is free flowing. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So go on. Carry on.
No, I was finished my point there. Please.
Okay.
Well,
So I would just say that, and adding to the narcissistic point that you brought up, that that you were describing includes also the necessary creation within these minds
Yeah.
of a virtual reality.
Yes.
And it is a reality that does not match the organic, if we could call it organic, but what is actually there, the sort of objective reality, if we can call it objective. But and it replaces it with a reality that has traits where it can remain relevant or even become more relevant than it would actually be. So that is something that I would also add to what you stated.
And if I may, if you want to jump in, GM,
go for
it. Just really quickly on that, I'm reminded as well of Ezekiel's vision regarding the Ophanim, or I believe the Hebrew translation is the many-eyed ones. That idea that you see within the chariots and within these angels, not to get, just to be very brief about it, the Ophanim could, in essence, be the visualization, the symbol, the symbolic representation of, if you will, the sorts of heavens, the sky, right? If we think of this world as a vivarium, then those many eyes are merely the sort of points of perception that, again, like what you're stating, Armin, that which people create, establish. You stated this idea of the virtual realities, right? It's the same thing regarding the Ophanim in a sort of symbolic sense, if we're to visualize it, that we establish many points of perception within our soul, and many personas which branch out from that root of the soul to thus encompass the mind. It sort of takes it over. It becomes again, that is really the root of narcissism in many ways. It colonizes the mind, these personas. Again, it's the path of least resistance which people take, that, again, all potential within existence seems to descend further and further down into lower and lower vibrational frequency, or lower and lower vibrational states.
Yes, it's just to make a parenthesis there. It's the identification of the self with the reflection, not with itself. Yeah. Go on.
No, absolutely. It's what's that idea as well regarding? I'm sorry, we're probably going on a tangent here, but
perfectly fine. Go on.
This idea of the eyes being both the window and the mirror, right? Again, with that sort of double reflectivity, you're always going to get this sort of schizophrenic schizophrenic expression of the potential which within each biological vessel, right? So you're always, again, like we see it, it's about 80-20. 80% of people really pursue the path of least resistance, which is to descend further and further down into lower and lower vibrational states, which one could call states of greater amnesia, where obviously on the contrasting side of that, people like us, if you will, we don't actually know, but people of a sort of higher inclination, they tend to want to pursue the path of self-discovery, which will lead them to self-knowledge or a knowledge of the self, which will then lead them, a bit like the Orphic egg, or even Moses's intertwined brazen serpent symbolism, will lead them to, I guess, a state of theosis, a unification with God, an understanding of existence and its origins, which obviously leads one to be better equipped to deal with psychological manipulation and to understand the environment in which they inhabit. Yeah.
Yes, agreed. What is your view, JM, on the narcissistic perspective?
Well, I'm conflicted in ways. I can go different directions with it, but give me just a moment, fellas, if you can.
Okay.
Sorry, I got to step out for 10 seconds.
Okay,
Sorry.
no problem. Yeah, so these virtual realities that are created that we were talking about, they are merely they are not actual and literal realities, but they are merely perceptive or perception based realities. So it is the self image does not match the self, but a reflection. And that reflection is usually, not entirely, but usually inverted in its quality. So like the image in a mirror, where the left is right and right is left, inverted in that sense. And so it becomes a deviant and insane even identification with a centered point of view that is not actually there. And we see this more often in the world, where it's usually the most ignorant, we can say, usually the most ignorant, that will take a more aggressive stance in defense of what they think they have acquired, but it's only a virtual reality that they've either built themselves or were given for their worth, for their self-worth, right?
Yes, agreed. It's, and whenever I speak to you, Armin, I've got a million things that I could say.
Well, that's good.
I don't want to take it down on a tangent, but you were mentioning this idea of the reflection, the idea of these. Let me just phrase this correctly. Just sort of just if I got the gist of what you were stating, this idea of the reflections of that people create. Let's take, for example, the narcissist, or even ourselves, right? Those points of delving into, it's the way to describe this, looking at the sort of the reflections, the outgrowths of, say, the personas that we create are reflections of the inward workings, right? Correct. They are both, again, they're born of that schizophrenic mind, the mind which is of two minds, the right and left hemisphere. you could think of that as the poles of evil, and obviously in between that is the thalamus, the inner chamber, which is the essence of God, if you will, that which bridges the two. If those are reflections, then you can think of it in terms of the descent into madness or blindness, which are the two hemispheric outgrowths of the right and left, right? Again, if we were to look at it in terms of Steiner's work, Ahriman and Lucifer, or you could think of it in terms of, again, the brain, the left and right hemispheres. There's another mythological set of characters that I'm forgetting now, but that idea is really, it can be all of the outgrowths of that can be shown within the infinite mirror paradox or optical illusion. So, for example, when the perceiver looks into the two mirrors, right? One is obviously a sort of it permits the light to go through it, and the other mirror stops the light. It bounces the light back, which creates essentially a sort of a lightning bolt, right? That descent into madness and blindness, and even that reascent into theosis, it produces this sort of infinite mirror optical illusion, if you follow me. These creations of personas, these creations of really what are reflections, constantly creating or reproducing themselves outwards, yet they're merely false. They're false reproductions. The number of them is false, because they're only born of the, fundamentally, if you were to look at it in a mental sort of framework, they're born of the shadow and of the higher essence, which obviously we can look at that in terms of the soul, the spirit, even the mind and the thought.
Yes, they become reflections of reflections.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yes, if you put two mirrors opposite to each other,
yes,
you're going to have this infinity effect of the image that is being projected. So there is an original at the center point. But if you look at any of those mirrors, you're going to see that sort of infinity reflection, right?
Yes.
You can also use two video cameras to do the same effect, but which is similar. It reminds me of that song by Nine Inch Nails, "The Copy of a Copy," and it is, I think, a fine description of that narcissistic personas, because it's not just one, usually, although it's usually seen as one, but it is a set of personas. For example, one of the greatest traits of a narcissist is to have many faces. So there's a face that is pleasant to this group, and another face that is a tyrant to another group or another individual. So those personas are, like you well stated, reflections of reflections. They are not reflections of the original, even. So they're not the first contact with reality when generating a persona. And this is really a good diagnosis of the insanity that we see in reality.
Yes.
Well, you're seeing it. You're seeing it in various ways now, more than we ever have before. And you talk about particular aspects of human beings or races or creeds who've been seemingly suppressed, we'll say, throughout time. Now, or groups or labels or associations or identifications. Over the last several years now, you're seeing that this underlying shame that sat with these that I just mentioned are now being celebrated and overglorified into this programmed pride that we've all been witnessing, especially for the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years, through things like a Black Lives Matter or feminism or the alphabet movement of sexual preference that's out there, and amongst other
Yeah.
things. And they've been given this giant mouthpiece to come out and, through their perceived victimization, have grown these prideful characters that, when we talked earlier about that divide, that it is only adding to it, because they're becoming so encapsulated with the image. And not only that, the programming at the current moment is obviously in a state of creating as much division as possible, knowing that what the ultimate goal is, but this is how in the short term they're more aggressively achieving it. And so for me, some of this victimization stuff is nauseating, but the underlying points that we're always getting at is that it's coming from a manipulated source. It's not coming from a true source or any source of purity. It's happening through an extreme and deliberate manipulation. And you have some people now that seem to be becoming more aware of it. But on the other side, you're seeing those who never were aware of it fall deeper and deeper into the abyss of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that that victimization that you were mentioning is trying to convert the mindset of those who accept those views into what Silas and I will just avoid the words just because of the algorithms, but what Silas names as Abrahamic or Asiatic or Phoenician, because they were the ones that seemingly were more exposed to these ideas that victimization provides a source of strength, a source of unification, a source of group and collective unification that becomes a mass that overcomes the obstacles, right? And so there is a conversion also going on that I don't think many are aware. That these groups, the alphabet, as you were mentioning, for example, that they are actually being converted into the same mentality through different means, through different even religious lifestyles and so on and so forth, but they are being converted to the same mentality that provided a source of strength and a connection to what we could name the shadow god or demiurge, a connection to that entity that wants basically new slaves for its army to manifest in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a jealous god as well, which,
Yes.
of course, if we look at the Platonic good, really it provides us with the truth that the Yahweh or the demiurge or whatever form it may take, whatever name it may go under, it cannot be God. It can't be the source of pure potential. That being because that which one covets or is jealous of, obviously one did not create in the beginning, right? Or didn't establish, he wasn't the source of it. So, furthermore as well, this idea of artificial victimhood is a tactic, that idea of the meek shall inherit the earth. It's quite brilliant. It's ingenious. I mean, essentially what they're artificially doing is consistently sort of putting, if you were to visualize it, putting pressure, artificial pressure on the group so that the group may build a sort of kinetic energy. That kinetic energy gets stored and stored and stored. The further you sort of push down, right, on this social spring, then it reaches a threshold. You can't push any further. That kinetic energy has built to such a point that once the threshold is reached, it springs back energetically. It becomes a destructive power. That is what is meant by the meek shall inherit the earth, essentially. That those who have so internalized this victim mentality that there is a great source of strength within that. And that's just one of the sort of psychological tricks that we see within not just the Old Testament. I mean, it exists everywhere, but the general psychological manipulator's handbook. But yeah.
Yes, and one of the potential collaterals that may come from that, that is, I believe, when it happens, it is unexpected, because that's basically how the essence manifests. It is unexpected. Is that when exposed to that pressure, or if we can say metaphorically, a heat, right? When exposed to this fire, it can result in a sort of seemingly alchemical process where the individual involved, and this always happening at an individual level, never at a collective level, but the individual, when exposed to that crucible, may transmute, instead of going into, like you said, the path of least resistance. It may cause that it starts actually to turn and to pay attention to a more essential inspiration rather than this group mentality. And so those people might actually take the opportunity and transmute the mercury that they were given, let's say, into another state that provides them at least a foundation to then do their own seeking. This can happen as well, and that's why it's very incorrect, I think, to generalize that everyone, every individual in these groups will have the same outcome, because they are actually being given these obstacles. All of us, to be here talking, had obstacles along the way, help as well, of course, but we had to accept that help from others, inspiration from others, for example. But all of us here had to overcome some sort of similar obstacles of psychological manipulation and all that. And the outcome was not that we joined those groups, but actually saw them from the outside, saw them externally, and saw ourselves apart, completely apart, even, we could say, sort of opposed to that idea. So that collateral, that opportunity for this collateral turning away is also included in this, and it is usually really, really unexpected when it happens.
Yeah, I concede that point. Yes, I like what you stated. It's very similar to what we have also undergone. That we have gone through the same systems, the same gauntlet of manipulation. Yet we've, again, the same baptism by fire. Yet we've come out different, structure and temperament and what have you. But I think in terms of their the tactic that they implement via that artificial victim complex and the creation of it, the instilling of it into the psyche of any given group, including their own group.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's based on the premise that, again, like what I stated, everything within existence, every potential realized, all of this entelechy, all of it will be, the majority rather, will descend into lower and lower vibrational states.
Yeah,
That's what I think they're they're betting
Yes,
on.
that is the purpose. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That is the purpose.
But I think they do know there are outliers. There will be outliers, and of course, some of those outliers as well may form competing ideologies, competing intellectual movements, things that may shift the mimetic pool, if you will, the mimetic polarities. But yeah, again, all of this is mimetics. It's all based on, all of reality that we see is an illusion to some degree. It is a mimic. It's created by he who mimics the true God, or attempts to.
Yes.
And what we see is a mimic of paradise, right? Like what you see within Genesis.
I'd even
That idea
that.
of there, it states in, I forget the chapter and verse now. I'll have to get it actually. It states that there is a river that runs out of Eden, and of course, if you look at the astrotheological comparisons to that, you see the symbolism. Which is replete throughout every mythology, all the way back to Sumeria and beyond. With the Epic of Gilgamesh, you have Orion, who sits in front of the Eridanus, the constellation of the river. He obviously takes on the fool character within the tarot deck as well. He has the dog star next to him, which acts as his companion. There's multiple ways to interpret that, but one way is that it is his more bestial aspect. It is his more demiurgic aspect. It's that soul, if you will, that which is born of human existence. Orion is the primordial man. It's that higher inclination. It's the spirit. So yeah, I think we all have to go along that journey. We all have to become seafarers, in many ways, along the Eridanus, along that journey. Of course, the majority of people will go with the current, will go with the path of least resistance, but there is always a sizable minority that seeks something that's more concealed. That far more powerful.
That you would say are 20% around that.
I hope so. I hope 20%. Yeah.
What do you think, JM? Is it 20%?
19, in my opinion.
This is like the Gnostic Price is Right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the mimic to me, Silas, has become a mockery, and we've all felt it at times, right? We've all been victims of it, in at least when we were in the mindset to allow that to happen. But when I say mockery, to me, this is I think what once started more as a mimicry has now, through the depths that they have gone to, in terms of what we can easily recognize, because of that, it seems like there is a complete and deliberate mockery of human life here now. And we could say this has been going on for a long, long time in that regard, but either way, no, I mean, that's in getting back to it. I think the more that this world feels, and we know that there is a deliberate manipulation always trying to get us to react and feel, and you could see through the entire world now, how fear, through just stories and words, not even observation in any way, has an effect on the way people feel. And when that feeling becomes so deliberate, and you become so attached to that, that means they got you. They got you. And that, in some of the narratives that are coming out now, when I talk about mockery, you can see it you can see them putting it in our face. It's almost like, yeah, we know we got you. Here you go. We're just, little slapstick comedy, if you will. But that's why, in my opinion, it's so much easier for those who have observed and can now see more to see it, right? And it's becoming more obvious by the day. And it's because we can see the foolish aspects involved with it. But what I wanted to roll into was we hear people asking the question all the time. Well, not all the time, but we're hearing it more of well, when how will we know if we truly can identify our true selves, or we know who we are within this? We have ideas of perhaps this and that and the other in this regard, but how will we know if we get to that point? Will there, you have people that have gone through near-death experiences, for example, and they will tell you of the light, the feeling, the love, all these kind of things. And I'm not talking death in this regard. I'm talking about, do you guys believe that there will be a point in time that we could potentially see or feel, not in any kind of superhuman way, a more deliberate connection to what we're talking about? And how do you think, if you use your imagination realistically, how could that play out, or what impact it can have on the realm itself?
Well, near death experiences in those terms can very well be also an illusion that is formed exactly to maintain the focus and attention onto the secondary within reality. For example, if you receive a sort of message from a loved one in a near-death experience saying, no, it's not yet your time, you still have to, I don't know, take care of your kids, or you have to accomplish what you started. In that sense, I mean, there's really nothing to build, nothing that will last here in this reality. Everything are basically sandcastles, right? And so whatever you build, I mean, the kids will eventually grow up and do well without you, and whatever you started does not necessarily need to be completed. The purpose of the journey is not to build anything that will actually be lasting. So in that sense, it could also certainly be an illusion. Now, as to the recognition, I think that we've all experienced what it is to have an instant and unexpected realization that we are absolutely, it is undeniable, and it is something that we can't even express. We try to translate it into words, or translate it even into a feeling, or into an imagery within our minds, and it can't really be framed at all. It can't be captured at all. But you suddenly know something that you couldn't know. So I think it manifests in that way, in that certainty that is absolutely transcendental, in the sense that it could not have emerged from the mind, nor from this limited reality, I would say. What is your opinion, Silas?
Again, I totally agree with you, Armin. And it comes to mind that Percy Bysshe Shelley poem, Ozymandias, that the great monuments of any empire or civilization will eventually crumble to dust. The statues of its great leaders, those who may have even been crowned as gods, those will rust as well. But they are, and again, I'm doing a sort of Gnostic analysis, if you will, on the Pennywise movie. And you brought that point, Armin, that we've all had those, sort of instant realizations, right, of great, profound truth, a sort of eureka moment, right, an epiphany.
Yeah.
And again, it's indescribable. You don't really even know how you may have ended up at that realization, but you just did. It was something that was, it's beyond the realms of material explanation. And we see the same thing, for example, within the chapter 2 of It, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, you brought up the point, JM, that it isn't a mimicry, it's a mockery, right? And what we see within even that Derry, or I'll get to that actually. I'll go back to the point regarding the realization. I don't want to lose my train of thought. Yes, within chapter 2, before they go into that ritual of Chud, which is essentially them, it's a sort of battle of willpower between, the individual and this sort of cosmic, archetypal, ancient, primordial force, which it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, Derry itself is a sort of mockery of small town America. It looks on the facade, on the veneer of it, it looks normal. But when you begin to look, behind the curtain, you begin to see the sort of cracks, the fissures of normalcy appear. So it isn't as it seems. There's something sinister behind all of it. Of course, funnily enough, the etymology of Derry comes from an old Irish word, dwar, which is the oak grove. And of course, if we know anything about the demiurge, the oak isn't the evergreen. It's not perennial. It is something which is firmly tied to the cyclicality and the seasonality of existence, right? As opposed to, say, the cedar forests, right? For example.
Yeah.
So it, and this ties into what we understand as the clown world today, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing is an unravelment of this sort of global Derry, right? This global oak grove, this amphitheatre of illusions, right? The globe theatre that we reside within. It's always been there. It always has been an illusion. But it's only through that fire, if you will, that which has the quality of immolation, has the quality of the zest of life. It also has that quality attached to it of the new dawn, right? The dawn,
Mm-hmm.
the comforting of life, the creation of life, the warmth. All of those paradoxical qualities, that only really comes from what it is. And it is fear. It is trepidation. It is that which seeks to belittle our realizations, our epiphanies, our eureka moments. It's that which seeks to, belittle us in terms of the self, right?
Yes.
It's that
And
which
sorry, and it always goes to predate, or predate in the sense of a predator,
yeah,
to prey upon the children as an essential child, right? That innocence. And this also reminds me, which also occurs in It, in the movie It, but it also reminds me of another movie. I don't know if you've watched it. If you haven't, do it. I think you can find the full movie on YouTube, because it's. I don't think that there's many copyright strikes for it. Which is Something Wicked This Way Comes. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, and which is a predation on children to exactly give their lives to feed this entity and fool people. I mean, actually, people fool themselves through their own desires, let's say, and they get stuck and become willing servants of this entity that gives them their wish in exchange for servitude. So it is, in that sense, that village. I don't recall the name of the village, but in that sense, it's just like the village in It, where there's this facade of a healthy country life and that kind of thing, a small town, like you said, but it has all of these accumulated, we can call them sins, although it's not really perhaps the appropriate word. But these potentials, these shadow potentials that are there simmering and just waiting for an opportunity, right? And the opportunity comes when the circus arrives in town and starts the whole process. And then it's the guy that was selling the lightning rod that eventually resolves the situation. But well, you have to watch the movie. It's for the listeners who haven't. I think it's very pertinent to also what you were saying.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important also to look at just a different aspect of tying in what you guys just both mentioned really well, is the fact that this realm is one that's designed for everything within it to consume in some way, and it needs it. Every living organism, material organism, needs something. It preys. So going back to that mentality, it has to prey upon something. And when you look at the mirrors of reality, reflecting upon nature itself, you can see the layers of it, and it doesn't end. We have this human idea that we are the so-called highest of the food chain, right? But and we think it stops there, and that everything below us in the animal world, um, they carry this predator versus prey mentality, and this is what they do to survive. But why have we become so naive to think that something isn't trying to consume us or isn't preying upon us, that they are the predator mentality, we are the prey? And we know through these reflections that that is very much what's happening here.
Absolutely.
But it's when you remove yourself from these ideas of having to generate emotion based on the fact that, okay, maybe we are prey in some way, maybe there is a predator after humans, or the loosh, as people will call it. It's got different names and labels. um, why do we have to be so naive to it? And more importantly, there's nothing to blame or anything to blame within the reality itself. It is a design that's playing out, and it's easy, especially when you first start to see these things, to point fingers and to feel that judgment building up inside of us, and we want to lash out and act out. And you're seeing that on the world stage now with those who are unaware of what we're talking about. But even for those like us who've gone through it, it is a constant attempt to transmute those energies and those feelings into something beyond what we recognize as the script and the narrative. But everything within that script and narrative is always, always, always consuming. And Armin, what's the movie? Is it called Branded?
Yeah, Branded is that movie that goes on in Russia,
Yeah, and it's
about the marketing egregores,
yeah.
basically.
So when
Yeah.
I make these points, this is what comes to mind. And if you haven't seen this movie, it's shockingly poor. You're not going to get any kind of real value from it other than the underlying tones that we're talking about. But it's basically an overriding system that continues to consume, and it does through the marketing, and does so through the marketing and advertising, getting humans to move in the directions to consume the product, so on and so forth, that it wishes for it to do so with, until it becomes so fat and immobile that it gets to that stopping point. Hello, you guys hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay,
go
Oh
on.
yeah,
sorry,
continue.
checking out. But Armin, I've heard you mention before, and again, I shared this video yesterday with some folks, good versus evil, in your video contemplations on YouTube, where you talk about
Hmm.
you talk about the pendulum, right? And it
Yeah,
it is a constant back and forth, momentum carrying one side one way, and then inevitably through the design, the shift begins to go in the other direction, until there is a slowing down of momentum and they meet at a center or a stopping point. Correct?
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yes.
you can see. Well, I don't know if you can see it, but you can get a sense that that's where this is heading. It's coming to that point of both sides having to take stronger and stronger look at themselves and one another. And there is so much building up to the point now where there isn't going to be room for a pendulum, because it's just going to be a mass at a center stopping point. And whatever that means, so be it. I don't have the answer to that. But
Yeah.
I think, Armin, you can probably reflect upon that a bit.
Well, the the first thing that I would comment upon is that if there's something that we know about life, is that shift happens, right? So, yes, when it's too much to one extreme, we know that the pendulum will eventually go to the other extreme, which is basically it looks just like the opposite extreme. And I mean, what is it's what I think it's. It was coined. I'm not sure if it was coined by him, but I hear him say it a lot. Tim Osman from IPS talks about the horseshoe reality, which is basically when two extreme opposite sides resemble so much each other that it's like shaped as a horseshoe, where the two extremities are closest, right? So it is, in that sense, a pendulum, and it is in the middle point of that pendulum that any kind of essential connection can be found and will be found, and eventually the two extremities will collide and consume themselves. And related to the branded movie, um, one of the metaphors we could use is that the shadows have eaten so much that they will eventually only have themselves to eat. So they will become, in that metaphorical sense, cannibalistic, right? So they will eventually devour themselves, like Ouroboros. And I know that Ouroboros relates to something else mythologically, but we can also use that image, that there is this entity that will eventually only have itself to eat. There is nothing more. It's the only thing that is compatible, is to eat itself.
Like the
Um,
like the children of Saturn in some
correct.
way,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you watch that movie, Branded, Silas?
I have not, no. It looks
Well,
interesting. I'll have to
yes.
check it out.
Yeah. There's no problem with a few spoilers. Basically, it's about how marketing campaigns create these egregores that a particular character, because he went through a specific ritual, can see. So, for example, they make an advertising campaign to favor a certain food chain of restaurants, right? And this character sees above these restaurants a sort of a umbilical cord feeding an entity that is growing fatter the more people consume in those restaurants. So, of course, this can also be transported to ideas, to worldviews, and so on and so forth. But it's a very interesting movie in that regard. Like JM said, it is not an interesting movie in the sense of the cinema art, but it is interesting in that metaphorical sense. Yeah.
Yeah, in a conceptual way, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I had a
Yeah.
similar feeling regarding even it. I have to admit, I don't actually. This might sound blasphemous to a lot of people. I don't actually like the writing style of Stephen King. I
Oh, me
don't.
neither. No.
I don't really like his.
Yeah.
But again, that's I'm not a lover of fiction, so
Uh,
I only really watch fiction or read it if it is something that contains a deeper concept that you can sort of get your teeth into, be it the symbolism within the cinematography or the symbolism itself that is laced thematically throughout the entire exposition of the story, or the overarching story itself. I mean, it would be one example of that. But yeah, I'll check that movie out. It's very interesting. Yeah, that even ties in with what we were stating or discussing rather with regarding the narcissists, right? Reflections of reflections. In many ways, that is what these egregores or tulpas are. They're mere reflections. They're the veils. They're the, if we understand that the nucleus of the lie is the truth, or again in this sense, at the nucleus of the illusory existence is the true reality, right? Beyond the unreality, then of course, to stop the perceiver of the illusion from getting to the crux of the truth at the center, they must then build, a sort of greater and greater defense and depth strategy, a greater and greater concentric rings of lies which surround it. And of course, who else is best suited to constructing these concentric rings of lies that enshroud the truth than the perceiver themselves, right? You make the perceiver believe that it, of course, is in their interests to build these bars upon the prison, within these greater amounts of bars, within their prison cell. So
yes, sorry to get in there, but it's like a choice. Imagine that you are given a choice in a particular point in time, which is, okay, I will look at this new information and run the risk of finding out that my entire life was a lie, was lived on a complete illusion, that I pursued things that weren't in any way, shape, or form connected to truth in any way. They were all illusory. Or I reject it outright and reinforce the identification that I am comfortable with, in a sense of, this is the monster that I know, and therefore I don't have to face the unknown, right? Because there is a certain death on the other side, a death of this worldview, a death of this persona that relies and is dependent on a specific worldview, right? So if given this choice, of course, that the perceiver will, the path of least resistance at least, is to lie over the lies, right? And they invent their own lies. It's like people on specific psyops that say that they have, yeah, I know a guy that died in that shooting or in that event or whatever, right? And then you ask for a name and, oh, I don't remember. Oh, I need to ask. And they never really come up with a name or with anything, because it's basically an urge to reinforce that thing must have happened because I have something invested in the game. And that something is more important than pursuing the truth, because it is the known monster. It's the monster that you know, that you're familiar with, that you lived your entire lives, or at least a good portion of them. And you letting it go is facing the unknown, is facing death, right? It's really a survival instinct, in my view.
Well, in light of our discussion up to this point, we could also add to the definition of the soul that the soul is the realization of potential. In many ways, it's that sort of Y principle of the Pythagoreans. It's the division of the potential, and in some aspect, maybe it is an impetus, or maybe it is the actual product of that division, or a combination of the two. Yeah, I would say everything within existence has to have a soul. It has to have, you could even think of it in sort of programmatic terms, it has to have a parameter or parameters by which it acts and reacts, not just to the environment, but to its own internal environment. So, yeah, I would say, yeah, nature does have a soul, I would say. Again, I think this idea of the animistic principle, there's something to that, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, and what we also observe is unlike um, recent, well, they're not really recent, but re-emerged ideologies. Unlike these re-emerged ideologies, I think nature is not this blissful, marvelous entity. Let's say, assuming that it has a unifying soul to nature as in general, because we do see. I mean, just the fact that there's prey, there's predator, there's the need to consume just to be here, just to remain, just to live another day. There's the need to everything in nature has to uh, cause violence to something else. It's impossible to be here without the use of violence, and just taking a step in nature will kill something. There's a bug, there's something underneath the soil or whatever. Even stepping on a plant inadvertently. I mean, going to the more extreme, for example, Buddhist ideologies that I'm more familiar with. It is impossible to walk in the forest and not inadvertently kill or at least exert some sort of harm to another living composite, let's say. So the nature itself, violence is embedded. So we know that nature, and that's why the Gnostics used to say that this reality is hell, is the underworld, because it is built upon this inherent violence. But it is only so, in my view, because it is a reflection, it is a shadow. And so all of the heroes in myths, um, at one point or another, have to go through this underworld, have to go through this hell, where basically their biggest opponent in this underworld is always themselves. It is always in some way or form, a confrontation with themselves, while in a context that is not favorable. And so this is what I think that we are doing here. We are, in that sense, the heroes, or potentially the heroes. Not everyone goes through that path, but we are potentially the heroes that are confronting themselves with themselves in a way that they are not even conscious of, so that they can arrive on the other side eventually, I hope, with the answer to the primordial, essential question that generated the reflections in the first place. Like Silas was saying, the bifurcation. The bifurcation happened because there was this initial thought. Thought precedes everything, right? Or at least in my view. It may not be so obvious to the listeners, but in my view, thought precedes everything. And so it precedes, of course, the creation of reality. It must have been a thought, an initial thought, that then bifurcated and generated in a fractal way all the other countless, probably infinite thoughts that generated all of reality. And all of reality, I'm not just talking the reality that we are limited to see, but all, encompassing all of reality that in some way or form is manifest. So I would say that.
In my opinion, the creation itself, like that idea that the eyes are, and even the mind, the prism of the mind, is both a window and a mirror. So everything that we see external to ourselves is ultimately merely a creation or an illusion born of perception, right? and perception itself has at its nucleus consciousness, or the thought, the initial thought, the first thought, and the fractal of that, the copy of a copy, the reflection of a reflection. However, everything that we perceive, if we understand existence itself, like you were saying, Armin, quite correctly, that existence is the essence of momentum, motion, the shifting tides, then really the only way existence itself could exist, if you will, for lack of a better word,
to manifest,
yes, is for something to perceive that motion, is for something to perceive that momentum, that shifting tide of it. Again, that is sort of runs contrary to what sort of modern Western thought would be regarding, material science. That they would believe that reality merely is, or external reality is separate from perception. It existed, it predated sentience. But ultimately, you can't get away from that fact that sentience has to have some. If we don't believe fully, or we don't theorize fully that existence is the product of consciousness, and the perception that consciousness generates, then it must at the very least play a dominant role within existence, and how it's established, how it maintains itself, how it even is sort of manifests itself.
Despite the violent nature of nature, so to speak, there is an obvious order to it, where, like you've well observed, JM, the habitat makes the creature, right? Makes the whether it's a plant or an animal or whatever, it's perfectly adapted to a certain a habitat, so a certain context, a context that, whether it is by one reason or another, will also shift. And so that the animal either adapts, the creature either adapts or it doesn't to the new order that is presented to it. And so, of course, by that, I am already linking nature and the worship of nature, of nature's soul, to human imposed order as well. And it seems like humans went away from nature. It would be apparent when we look at our cities and the habitat that we live on presently. But in fact, we are basically only changing the setting of nature with a copy of a copy. We copy nature into our cities. That is what I'm trying to say. The same dynamics that you see in the natural world are seen in the cities. There are predators, there are preys, there's a certain food chain, there's a certain even economics of group status, for example, that is very important for animal groups, that is also observable in nature. And also the fact that some creatures adapt well to a changing environment while others don't. And this is also observed in human society, right? So I think that it's these traits that we would say we can infer that these are negative traits. Okay, from a from our own moral point of view. Whether this is objectively, uh, um, if this is objectively so or not is a different matter, but we can observe them as negative traits, are transported by man onto this virtual reality that society is, a virtual reality within the virtual reality of nature. So it's inescapable. I think that order, that each to its place, is inescapable. And what we do see in the when there's an attempt at changing this order, like in the alphabet groups that we were talking about before, right? Oh, man is no longer man and woman is no longer woman. What we do see is that this is only applicable when a change in the environment is taking place. It cannot occur when the idea is to just perpetuate the habitat, right? In the same way that a tsunami can clear out, uh, um, a field or whatever, a beach, and carry anything in its path and clear out everything. So are these ideologies brought about to make a clear out, so that the new facade can be put in its place, right? And of course, this goes towards the idea of reset, which is very, I think, very observable. And so the points where human society actually deviates from nature's order is not in the building of society. It is only in these moments when a clear out is taking place. And I think we are right now living in one of those moments.
I agree with that as well. To add another point on that, I think in many ways what we see occurring right now, and of course these epochal cycles, whether we're at a grand or great reset as they indicate, the Zohar seems to state, as many other mystery religious texts seem to state, that again, which may all be mere offshoots of the Zohar, albeit, but the Zohar states that human history occurs within 6,000 years, right? And then it would imply by that sort of passage or statement within the Zohar that, well, after 6,000 years, coupled with the entire eschatology that we see throughout Abrahamism and the Zohar itself, that there is some form of revelation, an apocalypse, even if you will, Armageddon, right? It's a point of inflection, like what we were discussing, that it doesn't become a pendulum anymore. It becomes a mass, right? That it's not merely epochal swings. It's of that
It's a
pendulum.
flood.
It's a flood, a great deluge, yes, and it's a collapsing of the tower. That's another aspect of it, another emblem of it. It's a centripetal force that occurs at that point. It is really the sort of wiping the slate clean, and that again, that's not just a global happening. It's something that occurs on an individualistic level. So what we see is either you will transmute into a lower form, or you shall transmute into a higher form. That which takes the higher form will eventually, as I theorize, where this conspiracy probably started, in a similar place that we are at right now. That
scary, isn't it?
Ironically, that will corrupt itself and bring forth the next great epochal collapse, right?
Yes, Darth Vader was the prodigal Jedi, right? So
Yeah, well, exactly. It's exactly like that, yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. Spot on. That again, that idea that he is the chosen one, yet he becomes corrupted. That the chosen of the demiurge are those who know of the demiurge. It's a bit like Rocco's basilisk thought experiment. That the ones that this super intelligent AI, this basilisk, this serpent, this demiurge, the ones he does not kill, who know of his presence, are those who he chooses to be his harbingers within the terrestrial world, because of course he is merely, in this sense, is merely a super intelligent AI, or is
yeah,
digital, or again, in the context of the demiurge, he is an archetypal ancient cosmic force that acts through the consciousness of man, which again, all sentience is ultimately, be it formless or in material, it is all connected to one single common denominator of that pure potential, or God, or the prima causa, the first principle. Yep.
yes. And just like in the Arthurian myth, where Arthur and Mordred basically end up killing each other. That is the embrace, and even I recall. I mean, this is, of course, I'm talking about the not the written myths right now, but the cinematographic adaptation of that 1980s rendition of Excalibur, where um, in the final one of the final scenes is Arthur and Mordred basically killing each other, and Mordred says, "Father, let us embrace at last." Right, and it is that embrace of the shadow with its caster, with the caster of the shadow, that must eventually occur. And in my view, there is no victory. There is no victory of one side over the other that is possible. There are moments where it seems that victory is there, but an actual complete obliteration of the other side is impossible, in the same way that you cannot destroy an image in the mirror. At most, you can destroy the mirror, right? But not the image. The image is you. So, in that same sense, the self cannot destroy the shadow, nor can the shadow destroy the self. And this is very important to retain, in my opinion, because if you want, if you not you particularly, but any of the listeners, if you want the image to change, and this is very hard to accept, you have to change the self. You have to change that which is reflecting. And if we see this reality as containing all the potential shadows, we are going to pick up and get in tune with the shadow that we are compatible with the shadows, plural, that we are compatible with. So if we are not compatible anymore, if we lose that compatibility somehow, then we do not pick them up anymore. They are still there for others, for other potentials to pick up, but not for us. You understand? So uh, um, the embrace, the killing, let's say, mutual killing. Of course, this is not literal, all right? But the mutual killing, symbolic mutual killing of the self and the shadow in an embrace, like both holding daggers and sticking into each other in an embrace in a symbolic way, is the culmination at the, let's say, very end of reality, not the end of a cycle, but the end of reality. Because the end of a cycle is merely the pendulum going from one extreme to the other, passing through the middle, of course, but going through from one extreme to the other. But if we look forward, if we look ahead of that, and we imagine the actual end, the ending of this movie, let's say, it would be that embrace of the self with the shadow, the mutual acceptance of each other's power and each other's uh, um, even dependence on it, on one another. They are the same. They are the one bifurcated, right? So, yeah.
Well, that idea of the eclipse and what Armin stated, it is the unification of the limiting principle and the generative principle. And again, we have that inherent within our own cognition, vis-a-vis the right and left hemispheres, and obviously the delineation of thought that's produced therefrom. But like what we see, for example, with the eclipse, the uniting of the sun and the moon, right? Or we can even think of it even within the alchemical framework, the uniting of male and female, the uniting of Jupiter and Saturn, right? It's the same idea of the principle of limitation and generation uniting. That creates the pure potential. It's like what Armin stated, the end of reality. It began with contraction and it ends with contraction. And thus, at the center of it all, at the center of all reality, is chaos, is predation, is death. That's why you typically find within these alchemical depictions of the Ouroboros, of the hexagram in the center, again with those three principles of severity on the left, Saturn, the female, and the moon, and then obviously juxtaposed to that of Jupiter, the male, and obviously as well the sun. You find in the middle of that, which joins the hexagram, or the world of carbon, the world that's of charcoal, from the Latin, the world that is the product of fire, is Mercury. It is that conductor of the dead, if you will. It also links with the caduceus as well, which links with Aeon, the Leontocephaline, and all of these various depictions of time, and obviously the reascension of the spirit from its point of deathly descent. However, in terms of the eclipse, very important you brought that up, because what we see with the eclipse is essentially what we see with the depiction of the monad, which is essentially the human mind cannot comprehend the infinite. It can't comprehend pure potential. Thus, really what we see is mere deep blackness, right? And it's the same thing we see with our own pupils, right? The center of the pupil. And obviously the iris is around the pupil. The iris is Greek for the rainbow. The rainbow itself is that flash of color. It is that establishment of creation within the I believe the Sanskrit is the Niva Dikpala, which means the guardians of the 9 directions. The center of that is Shiva, and surrounding Shiva is the rainbow. So the rainbow is a symbol of destruction. It's that which is at the center of it all, of bifurcation, of the flash of color, of chemical reaction between the generative and limiting principles, which then sort of chaotically coalesce, and then eventually they sort of iron themselves out. They stabilize into form. However, yes, it's really the eclipse is that idea. Oh yes, here it is. Yes, the pupil derives from the Latin pupillus, which means orphan, right? Or in other words, that we are the spiritually innocent child, right? Again, it ties in with Pennywise in it. Why the demiurge feeds on the children. that the children aren't really children. What they are is symbols. They're emblems for spiritual innocence, right? Spiritual, the deathly
Let me
disturbed.
just
Yeah.
let me just make a parenthesis there. It's like that famous painting by that Spanish painter, I don't recall the name, of Kronos eating his children. What is the name of the painter? God, I forget. But I'm sure you're familiar with it, right? Kronos eating his children. Oh man, what is the name? I need to look it up. But
Was
go
it
on. Sorry,
Dali?
I'll look it up. No.
No.
I'll look it up. Go on.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's that idea of the orphan, the contained within our eye itself is the truth of our origin. Of course, you have to look in the mirror to see it. Which is, it's interesting, that idea that we brought up at the beginning of the infinite mirror optical illusion.
It's Francisco Goya, by the way.
Oh,
Francisco Goya.
Yes. I know which one you're talking about, actually.
Yeah.
So really, at the center of it all, the center of our own eye, is that understanding that we have within us that pure potential, that potential for the unification of the limiting and generative principles, for the abolishment of predation, which is the fundament of existence.
Well, I would say, commenting on the eclipse, that first of all, I'm not. I know that is the perspective, but I'm not convinced that the eclipse is caused by the moon over the sun. However, it shows like the two eyes becoming one, or we can also see the eclipse represented in that very now made famous Freemasonic gesture of covering one eye, right? I think we lost Silas. No, he's back.
Back.
Of that Freemasonic gesture of covering one eye. And that gesture, to me, represents the qualities of an eclipse. And the eclipse, if we consider, even though I'm not convinced that it's physically and literally the moon and the sun involved, if we see that it's a representation of the eclipse, we see that there is a deceit quality being conveyed by the eclipse itself. It's like, okay, it's day, but it's no longer day, or it's night, but it's no longer night. So it's as if the witnessed reality changes to a deceit, to something that is not actually there. So this might be also why it is so dear to the demiurgic cults, because they basically, as we've been saying since we started talking, they rely and depend upon the deceit of making the reality into something else that is not actually there, right? That is not visible, let's say, that is not even in accordance with the essential purpose of all creation, which is not, in my view, blissfulness and happiness. We, as essential beings, already had that before we created reality. If the objective was to be blissful, we wouldn't have. We, as let's say, individual manifestations of the creator, in the sense of the original essential being, would not have created, right? If the idea was to be blissful, we already had it. So the idea was to acquire self-knowledge, in my view. At least that is my perspective. So I think that the eclipse may very well represent deceit in general, you know.
People have said that. I don't know. I don't know. However, I mean, the way I don't really look at astrology as such. I look at astrotheology. So, for example, within the stars is essentially, for example, what Armin was stating. When you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, you see within it this, through the constellation art and the constellations themselves, which they tell a story. That story is sort of perennial. It is contained within pretty much every single culture that has existed. So that idea of Orion traveling through the Eridanus, defeating Humbaba within the Epic of Gilgamesh, or Perseus defeating Cetus and Medusa, which is a mask of Phobos or fear. It's the same thing. It's the same idea that Orion defeats the Pleiades, which is fear, that which looks upon and supports the bull of heaven, or Taurus, which is the earth. It's also symbolic of Inanna, or this principle of oblivion, this principle of severity, predation that we're talking about. He must defeat them to then understand, to see Ares, to see the fire of the dawn. Then he begins his journey. But inevitably, what does he find at the end of the Eridanus? Well, he finds the Fernax, or the furnace, right, as we see at the end of Revelation. Again, reincarnation, that is symbolic of that. He sees another thing, I forget the name of it, the constellation, but he sees between, right at the end of the Eridanus, is the Horologium, which is the clock, or time, and it is also the phoenix, right? So it's that idea that the beginning is the end, that fire was in the beginning and fire will be in the end. And ultimately, it's a tragedy and a comedy. So the tragedy is that the beginning is the end, that his journey, like what we see in the Epic of Gilgamesh, is futile. Yet, within the Epic of Gilgamesh, he looks back upon all that he has lost and all that he has gained, and he finds peace. He, I believe, within the Akkadian retelling, he, praises Ut Napashtim, which is, I believe, translates roughly as the servant of the 2/3. So again, this idea of bifurcation, or the Cartesian dualism of mind and body, right? That Gilgamesh did not, or Orion did not find his spirit, but along the way he understood what his mind and body were. He understood what he was and what he was not. He understood the illusion, yet he was still trapped within it. So this is the comedy and the tragedy of the journey, of the seeker of Gnosis, of the fool, which of course derives from the Hebrew word for Orion, which is Kessel. Right, you've probably heard it from Star Wars, the Kessel Run. Han Solo did it in 12 parsecs, and that's a little nod to that. But you mentioned it as well, Armin, regarding Mordred and Arthur. So from the Brythonic or the Welsh etymologies of that, Mordred is, moderation. It's that which is controlled, right? It's the higher civilized essence of man. Arthur, I believe, derives from the Welsh, or no, it might be Celtic actually, or Scots, meaning bear. So that it's it's the same thing we see within Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh and Enkidu, right, or Enkidu, the lord of the reed marsh, Gilgamesh, our ancestor was the hero. That's literally what it translates to, or the heroic ancestor. They both eventually fight, but in the sort of almost fatalistic combat they have, they eventually unite. So essentially, what that is the shadow or the bestial aspect of oneself, that aspect that seeks, predation. It wants to prey upon other things, right? It wants to create more bifurcation within the world, like the Lichtenberg pattern, right? The Y principle. It becomes it becomes subordinated to the higher inclinations of man. Like what you were mentioning, they both stabbed each other. They both mutually understood that to compromise and to unify essentially means that both of them must die in some, aspect, right? They must die to some degree. They must enter that realm of death to thus unify, to thus find peace. I mean, it's very similar to what we see even with wars, right? You can make temporary peace with your enemy, but eventually, if the animosity is there, the only way to settle it is for one nation to utterly destroy the other. In a sense, what we see with Mordred and Arthur is a sort of again that unity based on the mutual destruction of the other, the compromise in between the two.
And it is also interestingly could be seen as a different unification of sun and moon, because in that, and I'm talking about talking about the movie, you see Arthur as the silver king, the silver knight, so the moon, and you see Mordred as this sun golden armor. So they eventually join and kill each other. So that it could also be another symbolism there for the eclipse.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah. I mean, even the Welsh Pendragon, I believe it means the supreme. I think the Welsh for dragon. Either again, if we take the etymology, the Latin etymology of dragon, then you get the supreme serpent. But within Welsh, I believe it means like a standard, or like a war banner, a standard. So the supreme standard. That's literally.
And they had these apparently historically, if we believe the history records, they did have dragon-like banners that they brought to battle. Yes, so that had the shape of a dragon. Instead of a flag, a normal flag, they would have these serpent dragon kind of things waving in the wind. Yeah,
And interestingly, on that, within the Epic of Gilgamesh, and again we see this sort of ancient illusion that crops up later on in the Abrahamic religion, vis-a-vis the Amorite invasion and takeover of both Akkad and Sumeria. We see that the serpent within the Epic of Gilgamesh, after he dives deep into the sea, right? Again, this is all major metaphor. To find, I believe it was a box thorn-like plant that Utnapishtim, or the servant of the 2/3, states that will grant him immortality. So again, the entire premise of the Epic of Gilgamesh is Gilgamesh attempting to forestall or to simply dissipate his mortality, to become immortal. And he after his deep dive, his arduous dive to grab this box thorn plant, he resurfaces. He goes to the shore, places it at the shore, and ritualistically washes himself, I guess, cleanses himself from the arduous journey, only for the serpent to then eat that boxthorn-like plant. And of course, Gilgamesh, is completely just shocked. He's sort of, beside himself with grief at this fact. And really, what you see with that is that illusion that the serpent is an evil, or not evil, it's mischievous, it's a trickster.
Yeah.
And again, it's that idea of the at the end of the Eridanus, all you will find is rebirth and time once again. That the centripetal force, once it contracts inwards, it, again, like what we were stating with the pressure, right? The victim complex, the meek shall inherit the earth. If you
Right.
push pressure against something, eventually it reaches that threshold of kinetic energy, which it springs back, right? It creates an explosive outward force, and it creates existence once more. Then existence then descends until it reaches such a point that it must revert back to the mean, it must contract, only to then recreate itself. So fundamentally, what we're getting at here is the God, the source of all will always establish existence. That we ourselves will always establish existence, because we have that curiosity, we have that drive to know what could we be, and eventually that descends down into what am I, right? And then reascends back into what will I be. So it's the pendulum between the cogito ergo sum, the I am, and the cogito ergo es, right, which is what will I be. The contraction, and I guess you could call it the centrifugal force, the differentiation between the two. That's what establishes existence and the forces of chaos,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're around the 2-hour mark. I think this has been a brilliant conversation. I hope it was interesting as well for the listeners. Please leave any feedback that you find appropriate. Yeah.
I have just released. I'm going to release another book as well, so you can find my books on Lulu, Amazon, even Barnes and Nobles as well, and those types of websites. I'm also on YouTube, BitChute, Rumble, Odyssey, under the moniker of Silas Speaks. And you can email me at silasspeaks@gmail.com as well if you want to have a correspondence or require any notes.
Yes, Silas is a very interesting mind, as you can tell from this conversation, and do check out his channel if you haven't yet. And well, like I said, hopefully you got something useful from this conversation. This has been episode 2 of Pro.Gnosis. I must say that between us both, Silas has the sexier accent.
In the spirit of humility, I respectfully disagree.
Okay, well, we'll leave we'll let that to for the listeners to judge. And like I said, it's been episode 2. Please leave any comments, any feedback on either on the comment sections of where you find this video on Odyssey or on any of the podcast platforms. You can also reach me on my email, which is armoonri@sapu.pt. That is also available. I mean, instead of spelling it out, that's also available on the YouTube channel if you go to the About section. So
we could also mention as well the Guilded and Discord servers if people want to join. And they also
yes, Silas has a very interesting server on Discord and Guilded, where a lot of these subjects are discussed, and we sometimes hold long and a conversation just like this over there.
Going
So
on wild tangents.
yes. So that's also interesting. And if you want to join, just contact Silas on the email he provided, or leave a comment, and I'm sure that we can drop an invitation there
I can
as well.
send you a link, and you can maybe just put it in the description, Armin, if you wanted.
Yes, I think the issue is that the Discord, well, for the Gilded maybe not, but the Discord invites expire. So it would perhaps need to be something.
I'll leave it. I'll leave it an open-ended invite link then.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Very well. All right, so this has been episode 2 of Pro.Gnosis. I hope you enjoyed it and got anything useful from it, and we'll catch you next time. See ya.
Pro.Gnosis, a podcast with J.M. and Armon Ree.